A veteran with PTSD was isolated from the world until a rescued German shepherd gave him a reason to live again. The rain came down in sheets, slashing against the windows of the small wooden cabin like 1,000 tiny knives. The wind howled through the pine trees surrounding the remote clearing, and thunder rolled across the dark Oregon sky with the weight of a battlefield barrage. Inside, Daniel Brooks sat alone in his dimly lit living room, the glow of a half-empty whiskey bottle flickering in the light of a dying fire. At 43, the war was long over, but it still lived in him, etched into the lines on his face, buried in the scars no one could see. He had been a soldier once, a respected sergeant in the United States Army, but that was before Iraq, before the explosions, before the convoy ambush that took 3 of his brothers in arms and left him with post-traumatic stress disorder. The sound of improvised explosive devices detonating had never truly left his ears. Now, years later, Daniel had no family, no friends, and no intention of rejoining the world. His days were marked by silence, medication, and just enough alcohol to keep the nightmares at bay. He rarely left the cabin. He did not need to. The forest kept people away, and that was the way he preferred it. That night, however, something broke through the familiar quiet, a sound that did not belong. At first, it was barely noticeable beneath the storm, but then it came again, a long, aching howl, a cry that curled into his bones. Daniel tried to ignore it. He turned up the volume on the old radio, took another swig from the bottle, and waited for it to fade. But the sound persisted, drawn out, mournful, like a soul crying for help in the dark. Finally, with a grunt of irritation, he grabbed a flashlight and shrugged on his old army field jacket. Stepping out into the storm, he cursed the cold as he trudged through the mud and pine needles toward the edge of the tree line. The beam of his flashlight cut through the rain in jagged arcs as he moved deeper into the woods, ears straining for the sound. There it was again. Closer now. Pushing aside low branches, Daniel nearly tripped over a fallen log before his light caught movement on the ground ahead. He froze. There, curled up in the wet leaves, was a German shepherd, or what was left of one. The dog was skin and bones, fur matted with blood and filth, one leg bent at an unnatural angle. Its sides heaved with shallow breaths, and its eyes were dull with exhaustion. But they were still watching him. Daniel stared at the creature, his heart pounding, not from fear, but from something deeper, older. He took a step closer, and the dog tried to lift its head, then let it fall. He should have turned around, told himself it was not his problem, walked away. But as he turned to go, his light passed over the dog's face again, and in that moment, through rain and mud and time, he saw another face. A memory, the eyes of Corporal Jamie Harris, looking up at him in the desert, bleeding out after the blast. Daniel clenched his jaw. He hesitated. Then slowly, without a word, he removed his jacket and knelt down beside the dog. "You're not dying out here," he muttered, voice rough. He wrapped the trembling animal in the jacket, lifting it as gently as he could. The dog let out a weak whine, but did not fight. It just looked up at him, trusting, broken. Daniel turned and began the slow walk back through the trees, rain soaking his hair, thunder crashing above, the weight of a battered soul in his arms. He did not know why he was doing this. He only knew that for the first time in years, he was not walking back into that cabin alone. Daniel laid the dog gently on a wool blanket near the fireplace, his old army jacket still wrapped around the frail body. The storm had passed, but the silence inside the cabin was heavy. He lit a lamp, sat beside the dog, and instinctively reached for a bowl of water and his first aid kit. The dog flinched at his touch, but lacked the strength to resist. Carefully, Daniel cleaned the wounds, rinsed away dirt and blood, and splinted the injured leg with pieces of a broken broomstick. "Easy, buddy," he murmured. "I got you." When he finished, he looked into the shepherd's exhausted eyes. "You need a name," he said softly. Memories of Iraq and lost friends stirred within him. Ranger, he decided. The name felt right. The first few days were difficult. Ranger was skittish, reacting to every sound. He would not eat if Daniel was too close, and never rested deeply. Daniel understood that fear. He lived with it too. He gave Ranger space, speaking gently, staying near but not too near. In that quiet their connection began to grow, slow, uncertain, but real. Two broken souls figuring out how to coexist. As days passed, Daniel started changing. He stopped drinking during the day, cooked meals, swept the floor, even shaved. He mixed soft food for Ranger and played quiet music to soften the silence. Ranger began to relax. He ate well and stopped flinching at footsteps. One morning, Daniel awoke to find Ranger asleep at his feet. That night, when a nightmare gripped Daniel, Ranger barked sharply, waking him from the memory's grip. Daniel sat up, gasping, and met Ranger's steady gaze from across the room. For the first time in years, someone had pulled him back from the edge. Trust blossomed. Ranger followed Daniel around the cabin, sat near as he chopped firewood, and rested his head on Daniel's knee as they watched the fire. Then one night, a sudden flashback triggered a full panic attack. Daniel's hands shook violently, his chest tightened, and he collapsed to the floor, breath shallow, soaked in sweat. Ranger ran to him, nudging his face, laying his head on Daniel's chest. As Daniel's body convulsed, Ranger licked his face, his hands and neck, whimpering softly, refusing to leave his side. Daniel clung to him, arms wrapped tightly, grounding himself in the warmth and presence of the one living thing that understood. For the first time in years, he reached for someone, not in fear, but in hope. Eventually, the attack passed. The room fell still. Daniel held Ranger close, whispering, "Thank you, Ranger." The dog licked his chin gently in reply. It had been nearly 2 months since the stormy night Ranger entered Daniel's life, and the changes were no longer just inside the cabin. They were in Daniel himself. One morning, after noticing that Ranger's injured leg still caused a slight limp, Daniel made a decision he had avoided for years. He stepped outside his comfort zone. He drove into town. The veterinary clinic sat on the edge of the main road, a small, warmly lit building with flowers in the window box and a painted sign that read, "Hope Valley Animal Care." Daniel sat in the truck for nearly 15 minutes, gripping the steering wheel, debating whether to turn around. Ranger, sitting quietly in the passenger seat, turned his head and let out a soft woof, as if to say, "We've come this far." Inside the clinic, a young woman greeted them with a smile. Her name was Dr. Leah Monroe. She was in her early 30s, with kind eyes and a voice that didn't rise too high or fall too low, perfectly steady, like the sound of water in a calm stream. She didn't ask Daniel personal questions. She didn't flinch at his silence. She simply knelt in front of Ranger and whispered, "Let's take a look at you, handsome." Daniel sat in the corner, arms crossed, unsure whether to stay or bolt. But something in the way Leah moved, gentle, efficient, confident, kept him grounded. For the first time in a long time, he let someone else lead the moment. After the examination, Leah looked over and said softly, "He's healing beautifully. Whatever you've been doing, it's working." Daniel cleared his throat, nodded once, and said quietly, "He's been helping me, too." It was the beginning of something. Over the next few visits, Daniel found himself speaking more. Small things, questions about Ranger's diet, therapy options, how to help him with anxiety. Leah always answered with warmth and clarity, and in time, the clinic visits became something Daniel didn't dread. One day, Leah handed Daniel a flyer. "We're hosting a therapy dog workshop next weekend," she said. "Basic training for emotional support animals. I think Ranger would be amazing, and maybe you'd like being around others again." Daniel took the flyer, unsure. But that Saturday, he showed up. The group met in a local park, a quiet green space surrounded by trees. Ranger was cautious at first, but within minutes, his tail was wagging as he greeted other dogs. The instructor led the group through exercises: sit, stay, lay down, retrieve, alert. Ranger excelled. His military instincts kicked in, but there was something else now: joy. Daniel watched in awe as his dog performed tasks designed not just to serve, but to heal. When someone in the group had an emotional episode, Ranger moved to them calmly, laying his head on their lap. It was as if he had been born to do this. And then came the moment that surprised Daniel most. After the class, someone approached him, a fellow veteran named Paul, and asked about Ranger. Daniel found himself talking, smiling, even laughing at a joke. It was the first genuine laugh he had felt in years, and it startled him in the best possible way. Week by week, Ranger pulled Daniel out of isolation. They went on walks in town. They visited the farmer's market. Daniel started making eye contact, nodding at neighbors. The world, once sharp and full of threats, softened around the edges. Then, a reporter from the local newspaper reached out. He had heard about Daniel and his dog from Leah. After some hesitation, Daniel agreed to meet him. The article ran the next Sunday. The headline read, "From Battlefields to Backyards: How a Rescue Dog Rescued a Soldier." The story included photos of Daniel and Ranger walking side by side, training together, and sitting under the tall pine tree near their cabin. The response was overwhelming. Letters poured in from veterans, dog lovers, and strangers who had simply been moved by the idea that healing could go both ways. Daniel kept the newspaper clipping folded neatly on the mantel, not for pride, but as a reminder. A reminder that he had once been lost, and a dog with a broken leg and a wounded heart had led him home. It was a crisp autumn afternoon when Daniel and Ranger set off for one of their favorite trails, a narrow path that wound through the dense Oregon forest behind their cabin. The air smelled of pine and damp earth, and golden leaves crunched beneath their feet. Daniel felt good, calm, centered in a way he had not known for years. Ranger trotted just ahead, his gait confident, ears perked, tail wagging lazily behind him. They had taken this path dozens of times, but nature has a way of reminding us how quickly control can slip through our fingers. Daniel stepped onto a patch of moss-covered rock just off the trail, his boots slipping on the damp surface, his body pitched forward, arms flailing, and before he could catch himself, he tumbled down a steep embankment and into a narrow, rocky crevice. The fall was short but brutal. He landed hard on his right leg, a sharp crack echoing through the trees as pain exploded through his shin. He cried out, clutching at his knee, only to find his foot pinned between two jagged stones. He tried to move, but the agony was blinding. He reached for his phone. No signal. The sun was already starting to dip behind the trees, and the forest was beginning to chill. Panic bubbled in his throat. Above him, Ranger barked sharply. The dog peered down from the edge, pacing back and forth before disappearing for a moment, only to reappear seconds later, whining frantically. He slid partway down the slope, stopping just short of the crevice, then edged closer to Daniel's face. He licked Daniel's cheek, his warm tongue a shock in the cold air. "Go," Daniel gasped. "Go get help, boy." Ranger hesitated for a second, then turned and scrambled back up the slope. He ran, through the forest, across the trail, and down the gravel path that led to the main road nearly half a mile away. He barked as he ran, loud, desperate, urgent. Each bark echoed through the trees, carrying a message more instinctive than language. Help him. He needs help. A middle-aged hiker named Tom Jenkins was passing by in his pickup when he spotted the German Shepherd darting toward the road, barking like mad. The dog stood in the middle of the road, refusing to move, eyes locked onto Tom's truck. When Tom rolled down the window, Ranger bolted toward the forest, barking, then stopping to look back. Tom understood. He followed. It took them 10 minutes to find the crevice, where Daniel was barely conscious, his skin pale and damp with sweat. Tom called emergency services immediately, relaying the GPS coordinates. While they waited, Ranger crawled down to Daniel again, curled tightly against him, refusing to leave his side. When the paramedics arrived, they had to work carefully to extract Daniel's leg, stabilize the break, and carry him up the slope on a stretcher. Through it all, Ranger stayed close, tail low, eyes watching every move. At the ambulance, a paramedic reached for the door, intending to load Daniel inside. Ranger let out a deep, warning growl, positioning himself protectively. "Easy," the medic said. "We've got him." But Ranger would not budge, not without permission. Daniel, dazed from the pain but still aware, lifted his head slightly and whispered, "Ranger, it's okay." The dog hesitated, then slowly backed off, climbing into the ambulance as soon as the door opened again. He lay beside Daniel's stretcher, head pressed against his shoulder, unmoving. As the ambulance pulled away, Daniel reached out and rested a hand on Ranger's back. He took a shaky breath and said, voice hoarse but full of truth, "You saved me. Again." Ranger closed his eyes, as if he had known all along this was what he was meant to do. Recovery took time, but Daniel healed, not just the broken bones in his leg, but the deeper wounds he had carried for far too long. The accident in the forest had forced him to confront something he had never expected. He wanted to live, and more than that, he wanted to help others find their way back too. With Ranger by his side, Daniel joined a local veterans outreach program, offering to volunteer in group therapy sessions for soldiers struggling with post-traumatic stress disorder. It began with quiet attendance. Ranger would sit calmly beside veterans who could not speak about their pain. Sometimes, his presence alone brought tears. Other times, it opened the door to words. Word spread quickly. Ranger had a gift, one not trained but earned through survival. Veterans who had closed themselves off began requesting to sit near him. Ranger knew when to lean in, when to nuzzle a shaking hand, when to simply stay still. Daniel became a certified peer mentor, and Ranger was officially registered as a therapy dog. Together they visited clinics, support groups, and even hospitals. Ranger was no longer just a rescued dog. He was a rescuer, a healer, a bridge between isolation and hope. One afternoon, Daniel received a call from a National Veterans Service Organization. Ranger had been nominated and selected to receive the Service Dog Hero of the Year award. The ceremony would be held in Washington, D.C., with press coverage, dignitaries, and hundreds of attendees. Daniel was hesitant, but he knew this story was not just his anymore. The night of the event, the auditorium was filled to capacity. The lights dimmed, and a video montage played across the screen. Clips of Ranger during therapy sessions, walking beside veterans in silence, and curled up at Daniel's feet in a circle of chairs. The final image was a still photo. Daniel and Ranger beneath the organ trees, side by side, two silhouettes bathed in sunlight. The MC called their names. Daniel walked slowly onto the stage, Ranger beside him, tail wagging slightly. Applause filled the room. As they stood at the podium, Daniel adjusted the microphone. He looked out across the crowd, then down at the dog seated calmly at his feet. "He was the broken one," Daniel began, voice steady, raw with honesty. "But he pieced me back together. Ranger didn't just rescue me. He reminded me how to live." The room fell silent for a long, sacred moment, then erupted in a standing ovation. In the days that followed, their story aired on national television. Millions of viewers watched. Letters, emails, and calls poured in. People were moved not only by Ranger's heroism, but by the message. Healing was possible, even after everything. Daniel never sought fame. He only wanted peace, and in Ranger he had found it. One evening, back at home, the sun was setting behind the trees, painting the sky in gold and rose. Daniel and Ranger stood at the edge of a quiet field, the grass swaying gently in the breeze. Their shadows stretched long across the earth, side by side. Not two broken pieces, but one whole story, one family. Thank you for watching this incredible journey of healing, hope, and the unbreakable bond between a veteran and the dog who saved him twice. Ranger's story is a powerful reminder that sometimes the ones we rescue are the ones who rescue us right back. If this story touched your heart, inspired you, or reminded you of the quiet strength animals bring into our lives, we invite you to become part of our growing community. Subscribe to Amazing Paws Stories for more real, emotional, and unforgettable tales just like this. Stories of loyalty, second chances, and the paws that leave prints on our hearts. Give this video a like, leave us a comment to tell us what part moved you the most, and share it with someone who could use a little hope today. At Amazing Paws Stories, we believe every paw has a purpose, and every purpose deserves to be heard. We'll see you in the next story.